Hi, this is Steve Myers from Theta Music Trainer, and you're listening to the Musicality podcast.
Ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hi, this is Christopher, founder of Musicality, and welcome to the Musicality podcast. In 2010, I was about a year into running my company, trying to make it fun and easy to train your musical ears. So when a new website appeared, promising a range of ear training games, naturally I was excited. That website was Theta Music Trainer, and over the last several years, it's gone from strength to strength. It now boasts a range of 50 ear training games, covering a wide range of core topics, including chords, rhythm, relative pitch, audio EQ, and more. The games are now available on iOS and Android, as well as in your desktop web browser, and they've helped over 50,000 musicians worldwide. Back in 2010, I had the pleasure of interviewing Theta Music founder Steve Myers about the site, and on the show today I'm delighted to have the chance to catch up with him again and learn about Theta Music Trainer and how their ear training games have been helping musicians to develop their inner musicality. You'll learn about Steve's own ear training journey and what made him see the potential for ear training games online. He shares the surprising thing they learned about who it is that uses Theta Music Trainer and how that's actually different in their home country of Japan. And Steve gives his top tips for getting started with ear training yourself. Theta Music Trainer is something we've continually recommended ever since it launched, including to members of Musicality, who tend to find it's a great addition to the training we provide. It was terrific to have the chance to chat with Steve, and I hope that you'll find this conversation gives you some fresh ideas for your own ear training. My name's Christopher Sutton, and this is the Musicality podcast from Musicality. Hi Steve, welcome, and thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Chris.
Let's start out, if you don't mind, with your own musical story. I'd love to hear about how you got started learning music.
Sure. I started playing guitar when I was 11. So I come out from a guitar background. And I learned to play mostly, by somebody would sit down with me and show me the song, show me the chords to a song, or I would go out and get the sheet music and learn like that. And basically it was figuring out step by step where to put my fingers on the guitar being a fretted instrument. You can learn that way, and so I would learn songs like that, and I didn't really have a sense of what it meant to be able to play by ear or improvise or anything like that until I started seeing people do that, and I was just amazed every time I saw somebody who could improvise a solo, on the spot. I was like, what did you just play? And they'd be like, oh, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? You must have memorized it. I'm like, no, I'm just jamming. I was like, what does that mean, just jamming? And anyway, it was like magic to me to watch people be able to improvise on the spot. And I really wanted to be able to do that from the first time that I saw someone. And, I received advice like, well, just use this scale. So here's a pentatonic scale. Just play with that. And I would try that, but it didn't sound like a solo. It didn't sound very musical at all. And so I kind of struggled along like that for quite a while. And eventually, I just figured, okay, this is just something that I can't do. This is like a talent that I don't have. And so I just kind of resigned myself to, just continuing to learn chords and solos that I memorized. And and I continued to play music like that for quite a while.
It's remarkable. I relate so much to that experience, and I think so many people do. And the way music is taught often leaves us in that situation of, looking at someone who has freedom in what they play and how they play it, and assuming they have to have a gift or be talented. And what I find most remarkable, I think, is how many of us persist nevertheless. We love music so much, we still learn, we still study year after year, even though a lot of us are thinking, maybe I don't have what it takes, maybe I'm not a real musician. That's certainly how I felt for a long time.
Yeah, same with me.
It sounds like that wasn't always the case. You did eventually have a change in mindset. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I basically continued from the time I was 11 until the end of high school. By the time I finished high school, I'd still play guitar the whole time, but like I said, I'd kind of given up on the idea of being able to improvise. So I kind of put the guitar aside, just kind of played intermittently throughout university. But while in university, I did that. I took a course in music theory and became even more confused by a lot of it. And it struck me as something that I couldn't really use, because it was based on 4-part writing and a classical example, and it was I couldn't see how to apply it to the kind of music that I was playing. So I put music theory in one of those, and in the same kind of category. Okay, I just don't get this. And so I finished university. I got a regular job. Actually, coming over to Japan. And once I got a little bit of free time, I started picking up the guitar again and fiddling around with it. But I was still kind of stuck. And one day I was going through a guitar magazine and saw an ad for. Basically, the ad was set up in a way that it showed this guy who was trying to improvise but couldn't, and so the problem is he needs perfect pitch. If he had perfect pitch, then it would be no problem. You'd be able to just play freely and express yourself any way that you wanted. And I thought, wow, okay, hey, this sounds like me. This guy looks just like me. And what's this perfect pitch stuff? Maybe that is what I need. And so I was sold on it. I sent off, and it turned out to be a course of cassette tapes, or a cassette tape based course. It was 50 tapes, I think. And it turned out that perfect pitch was actually a fairly minor part of the course, and it was only towards the end, and a relatively small percentage. The bulk of the course was on ear training. It was ear training and music theory, but it was music theory presented in a way that you could actually apply it to your playing. And so from that, I was able to start piecing, or putting, some of the pieces from the puzzle started falling into place with that course. I got introduced to the idea of patterns in music. For example, how chords are constructed. For a long time, I was always confused as to why is a seventh chord called a seventh chord? What is it about a minor seventh and a major seventh? What exactly is the difference? And so one of the things this course did was not only help you to recognize the sounds of those individual chords, but to also understand how they were constructed. The pattern by which each type of chord was made. And so anyway, by the end of that course, which took me well over a year to work through, and it was also very, pretty tedious. It took a lot of self-discipline to sit down with it every day. But it really reignited my desire to learn to improvise again. And by the end of it, I was able to, recognize the sounds of certain chords, 1, 4, 5, and be able to take some of these patterns that I learned and move them across keys. And that was a big eye opener. That was one of those aha moments where you say, hey, okay, this is starting to make sense now. And so that was, I'd say that was the biggest thing for me. By the end of that, I realized, okay, wow, this ear training is this is a big thing. It was really more about relative pitch and recognizing patterns in music.
That's really interesting, and I think it's an important point just to make clear for our listeners, because for a lot of people, when they think about playing by ear or improvising, or they hear about ear training, they assume it is about perfect pitch. Can you recognize the A note out of nowhere? And it's a lot of our work at Musical U is often kind of explaining actually the skills you want. They're much more about relative pitch. It's about figuring out the notes you're hearing and their relationships to one another. And similarly for chords, it sounds like that was core of the course that you found so useful.
Absolutely, yeah. It was completely relative pitch, and I remember after that, later on meeting many accomplished musicians and professional musicians, I was actually surprised at how few actually have perfect pitch. Being able to recognize that tone without any reference right out of the blue, and at the same time, being impressed by the fact that nearly 100% of them had very good relative pitch.
So once you had that breakthrough and you had done this training course for a year or so, what impact did that have on your musical life? How did it change your relationship to the guitar or to learning music?
Right. Well, the first thing was, for the first time, and it started out just in little and fits when I was playing by myself, over just using like a backing track. I was finally able to actually come up with some decent sounding improvised solos, and to take some of the patterns that I learned and move them across different keys and different feels and things like that. And so it really opened up the idea of being able to take for example, a phrase or a pattern or something and be able to use it in different contexts. Began to understand how some of these phrases fit, how people came up with them and how they actually related to the chords that were played over them. So that was the first thing. And I just remember some very exciting moments, in my room by myself playing, going, wow, okay, I'm starting to get this. But then, I would play with friends or in a session or something, and I would find that, a lot of these great breakthroughs that I had when playing by myself, suddenly I wasn't able to do it in a live situation. And so that was my first experience, I think, with being able to take something from the practice room into a live situation where you're playing with other people. And so after that, I think that's a process that's continued to this day, is realize, okay, you gotta, you do it over and over and over on your own. And then little by little, it comes out when you're playing live. It might just be a little phrase here that comes out when you're feeling a little adventurous. But then over time, that becomes a lot easier. And then those phrases start to come out in live situations as easily as they used to when you're playing by yourself. Mm-hmm.
It's a whole other transformation, as it were, to be able to do that stuff live, not just when you're sitting in your bedroom alone, practicing diligently. And I think this is an important point to talk about because, on this show, we love to share examples of people having these insights and realizing that what they thought was a talent or a gift actually is learnable. At the same time, I don't want to oversimplify or to have people underestimate the amount of work involved, because as you said, to do the ear training initially was a year or more. And even then, you were still just getting the hang of it in the practice room. And even once you got the hang of it in the practice room, it was another step to go out on stage and perform. And I think, you are not a rare case in that aspect. That is normal. That is the process. And even when you have these tools to accelerate the process, you do have to work hard day after day and keep working to improve. So how did all of this come to you actually starting Theta Music and developing the Theta Music Trainer?
Right. Okay. Well, so after university, I went into software development. And in the course of that, I came across certain educational type software, especially games that had some kind of educational or training component. And when I saw those, after at some point, I realized, hey, this would be a great application for ear training. Thinking back on the experience that I had with the 50 cassette tapes and the year of working through those day after day, and just the fact that those exercises were fixed, and I would do them so many times that I pretty much had memorized the order of the answers, things like that. And anyway, these kinds of games. I started thinking, this would be really good to just set up some kind of ear training site or program that's based around games, and to inject some kind of element of fun. Fun, and put a little bit of fun and some excitement into this process, especially in a way that people could just do kind of like, bits at a time. 15 minutes here, you got a little free time, just jump in, play a game or two. You don't necessarily have to do it too diligently or too seriously, because these are skills that you can actually kind of develop in the background over time. Once you get a little bit of a base in place, you can kind of continue to develop these skills, without having to focus hours at a time every day on them. And that was basically the impetus for starting Theta Music Trainer, was to set up some games where you could learn these skills of relative pitch and musical theory concepts that you could apply to your playing.
Fantastic. I identify so much with that. I think similarly, a technology-minded person who had experienced the traditional way of doing ear training, that was very much what led me to start our company. And I think you were really forward-thinking and cutting edge, because Theta Music launched in 2010. And, now we're maybe a bit more used to the idea of educational games and bite-sized training, sites like Duolingo trying to gamify learning. But in 2010, that was really very innovative, and you've continued to innovate since then. And I think you've had great success. I think your users would agree in making it fun and exciting to go through this process of ear training.
It's a constant work in progress. But we're trying to keep it interesting.
Well, I think that the comment I most hear from Musical U members who also use Theta Music games, I often hear that they just really enjoy them. That's something that definitely sets you guys apart, that they feel like they can go over, play some of those games, they know they're learning something, and it doesn't have to feel like, okay, now I'm going to sit down and study for 20 minutes,
All right, that's good to hear.
So tell me, what kinds of people are using Theta Music Trainer?
Right. It's interesting. When we developed it initially, we thought that our market was going to be mainly individual users. I had myself as like one of the target, the target audience for Theta Music Trainer. But after we launched, we started getting requests from teachers in public schools, including band directors and choir directors, and also private music teachers with their own studios, things like that. And they were asking if we had some kind of plan, for classrooms or some kind of school plan or something like that. And of course we didn't at the time. And so that was the very first addition to the system as a whole, was in response to those requests. And that came in the very first year. And almost right away after putting that into place and starting to make it more classroom friendly, we started seeing the shift, and it made sense when we thought about it, because basically being game based and without a lot of explanatory material on our site, you kind of need a teacher or somebody to help guide you through, and they were especially good for cases, for example, like if you have a band director and they have students that need help with tuning, you get cases where there's students that really can't quite distinguish whether one note is higher or lower than another. And so, very basic thing, basic pitch discrimination, skills like that, being able to match pitch, even, from choir directors, things like that, just starting at the very beginning. And so the games are good when you have students with some, most things are fine, but there's one thing that they need a little bit of extra work in. And it's the teachers are able to assign the right game for the right student in that situation. So to answer your question, and this has become more and more over the years, is our audience is really schools and private music studios and the teachers and their students.
That's fascinating, and I think it's a real testament to the quality of the games and the breadth of games you have, as well as their usefulness, that it has become such a go-to tool for music teachers across the US, I'm sure, and presumably in other countries as well.
Right. Yeah. US, Europe, Australia is the main ones for the schools.
So with Musical U members, one thing we found can be a real struggle for them, and particularly for the adults, is it can be hard for them to find time for ear training, and particularly when they're very focused on their instrument or repertoire or passing an exam, finding an extra 15 minutes in the day to sit down and do some ear training can be quite tough. And a couple of the techniques we recommend are to do kind of quick mini sessions during the day when you have just a few minutes to spare, or finding ways to practice on the go, whether they're waiting for a bus or standing in a queue, that kind of thing. I was so excited a few years ago to see you bring Theta Music Trainer to mobile with iOS and Android. Was that part of the motivation, or what brought you, because it was enormous effort, I'm sure, to port these web-based games to those two platforms. What was the driver there?
Right. Well, that was, so after getting it more school-friendly and teacher-friendly, the number one request we had after that was, can we make an app for it? And that it was at that point that we're starting to realize, wow, that was part of the plan that maybe wasn't so cutting edge. Was we didn't really have mobile in mind at the time that we started. Which the actual development for this started back in 2000, 2008, 2009, something like that. It was a bit of an uphill struggle, getting everything ported to mobile. In fact, I don't think we could say it was really all in place and all stable until last year. So it was a pretty big pretty big process. But the motivation was, as you said, people were requesting it, and the reason being is, especially in Japan and places where people are on the trains commuting, things like that. They've got 10, 15 minutes, and they've got their phone or tablet, and just want to be able to spend some time doing ear training. And that was the main reason we did it.
Fantastic. It's such a great resource for people now if they're training with Theta Music Trainer to know they can pick it up and go. And like you touched on earlier, these are skills that really benefit from a little and often. It's not the case that you need to sit down for 3 hours and bash away at it. Once you're up and running, a little here, a little there can go a really long way.
Right. And I think that's just a good approach for music learning in general. It's like a lot of people, and I was certainly one of them, you tend to want to really get into it and spend hours and hours at a time, and then get frustrated and then lay off for a long time, and that tends to be a lot less effective than just doing a little 15, 20 minutes a day, but consistently.
Absolutely. So you've had, I believe, over 50,000 people use Theta Music Trainer over the last several years. What have you learned along the way? Has anything surprised you about the way people have used it, or what's worked really well, or anything from those many thousands of users?
Right. Well, I think the things that have worked well, and most of the games that are used the most have to do with fairly basic skills. That's just one thing that we've learned. Like we were talking about earlier, pitch discrimination, tuning, keeping the beat, even things like just basic music reading skills, learning notes, notes of the class, things like that aren't really ear training per se, but are skills that if you're like a beginning band student, you might need. The other thing that has struck us over the years is that thing that you need varies greatly from person to person, and it trying to come up with a one size fits all program or even advice is very difficult. So I guess we've been struck by how some games are really useful for certain people and not touched by other people, and how that differs so widely from person to person. And different music teachers, of course, have their own approach, and so they'll use the games in their own way, and it's completely different from another teacher. And so just the variety of requests that come in, from people like, can you make a game that does this? Can you make a game that does that? And how different those are, I think has been been one of the big eye openers that we've encountered over the years.
That's really interesting. I think we've experienced similar things at Musical U, and I guess in a way it's natural with the incredible breadth of music and the musical universe. You know, we know that there are umpteen different types of musician and everyone is unique and different. But even knowing that, it was a shock how versatile we had to make Musical U in order for basically any musician to come in, find the things that were relevant and useful and interesting to them, and assemble it in a coherent way. It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I think it's amazing what you've done with that. That's such a difficult thing to do. So yeah, congratulations on.
Well, as you were saying, it's a work in progress. We're continually trying to work on that one. So Theta Music Trainer is also available in Japanese, and you and your team, I believe, are all based in Japan. Does the traditional music education system there differ much from the UK or the US system? Do you find people are using Theta Music Trainer differently in Japan than in the rest of the world?
Yeah, very differently. In fact, everything that I just said about the trainer being geared more towards teachers and studios and things like that doesn't really apply to Japan, or at least it hasn't so far. And that's primarily because the music curriculum here, especially in public schools, first of all, it's very good. Every student that goes through the public school system here comes out with a really sound music education. What I mean by that is that they have the basics when they finish, say, middle school. They're able to sing in tune and keep a beat. Basic rhythmic, harmonic, and especially melodic and singing skills. There's a lot of singing by yourself that students have to do, where they're given, for example, they're given a song and they have to sing it without any accompaniment, in tune and in time and things like that. And they're graded on that. And so it's not, for example, they don't teach things like improvisation or ear training per se. Music theory per se is not part of the curriculum, but those basic skills, the foundation that you need to build on from there is in place. Now, the thing is, it's the way that they teach that, though, is quite a bit different in Japan. It's a fixed do type system, yeah. And so it doesn't lend itself very well to a lot of the things that the trainer does. What we found in Japan, then, is that although it's not such a great fit for the public schools, it has turned out to be a great fit for adult learners here. So amateur musicians, or even pros and semi-professional musicians that just want to work on their, for example, ability to recognize chord progressions or brush up on music theory, or even start to learn music theory, the way that it's taught in the West. We get a lot of individual amateur adult users from Japan that use the trainer in that way. And the level of engagement also seems to be quite high. So some of them will just really, really get into it and shoot straight, play out every level of every game over the course of a few months. We also get a lot of older learners in Japan. Japan having a relatively high elderly percentage of the population that's retired and has time on their hands. A lot of these people are getting back into music, and so they're finding resources online, and there's really not nearly as much available online in Japanese as there is in English, and so in that sense, we tend to be the first service that a lot of them find, and so basically to answer your question, I think. The thing that's different in Japan is we're less school-oriented and more individual-oriented.
That's great. I'm so glad I asked, because while it's wonderful you've had such success with the schools in the US, I've always felt like Theta Music Trainer could be a wonderful tool for the adult musician. And at Musical U, it's been eye-opening to realize how many of our members are actually a bit later in life, a lot of them coming to it in retirement. And so I'm glad I asked and had the opportunity to have you say that actually these games are fantastic for adults too, and they are fantastic. Even if you're a bit later in life, it's not too late to learn these skills. I know a lot of people have anxiety that, they're past the point of developing their ears in that way, when in reality, that's just not the case.
Right. Yeah, no, I think, originally we had developed them for adult learners. And I think the reason that it hasn't been such a great fit for adult learners in the US is they require a little bit of guidance. As I mentioned, in Japan, by the time you're an adult, most of the population, the vast majority of the population, has a fairly high degree of musical ability. And so the base is already there. In the States, you'll get people that are approaching an instrument for the first time, and they've not really had the basic music training. They really do have some trouble maybe, say, matching pitch with your voice, or being able to discriminate between pitches and things like that. So you kind of have to start at a different place for each person. And it usually takes, like a teacher or somebody that is working with the individual and can see, okay, you know what? You need to start here. you need to back up a little bit and work on this skill. At the same time, you're practicing your instrument. Because when you come back to music as an adult, or even if you're doing it for the first time later in life, the first thing you want to be able to do is play something, and the ear training, even though it's really important and vital, is something that you can, like I said, kind of do in the background while you're practicing your basic instrument skill. And so a teacher will be able to focus on that instrument skill and kind of as an aside almost say, well, why don't you just play this game for a week or two, and that will help your tuning ability, or your ability to understand how chords work, or whatever it is that particular individual might need.
So we've heard a little bit about how Theta Music Trainer has developed over the years, from being aimed at the individual to moving more towards schools to building up this enormous range of 50 different games and taking it to iOS and Android so that people can use it on the go. It's been an incredible journey to watch so far, and really exciting the way you've continued to develop and improve and innovate. I'd love if you could just share a little bit about what the future holds, how are plans developing for the future of Theta Music Trainer?
Sure. Well, I'd say our main focus right now is getting it easier to use for people that are just coming to it. So, although I think for a while it's still going to be of more benefit to people if they have some guidance to a teacher. What we are working on is a first step towards that. Say, what is it that you want to be able to do, first of all? So let's say a person wants to be able to hear a song and be able to play it, or be able to work out the chords or something like that. What are the things that you want to be able to do with music? And from that, be able to set up kind of like an automated playlist of games for them. And so right now we call them courses. They're not really courses in the sense of they teach you with lots of informative content, but they do take you on a segmented or sequential process with a game that is appropriate for the skill that you want to develop. And we're not there yet. That's going to be, I think, what you see coming out over the next several months. But hopefully by the time we get to the beginning of next year, that should be in place. And starting from next year onward, our main focus is getting back to developing more games that address more musical skills, because there are still huge gaping holes. I guess we were talking about what's another thing that we've kind of learned over the years. It's that this is a huge, massive area, ear training and music theory. And with all these different, needs and requests from people that are using the program, we quickly filled up plans for the next 50 games already. So I think that's going to be what we work on mainly going forward from 2018 on.
Fantastic. Well, I know that a lot of our listeners who have used Theta Music Trainer before are going to be very excited to hear that's on the development roadmap. More games and more easier to use, more flexibility about picking those games. That sounds like a recipe for success.
Great. Hope so.
So, Steve, thank you again for joining us today. Before we wrap up, do you have any parting words of advice for the listener who maybe is feeling a bit like you did in the early days? They've been studying an instrument, but they're not really feeling like those guys up on stage who can just jam or wail or bust out a solo on a moment's notice. What advice would you have for them for getting into this world of ear training?
Right. First, I would say just don't give up on it. There's such a tendency, at least there was in my case, to say, like it's not for me. And so, you kind of set the instrument aside for a while. Even though you really, really do want to do it, you think, okay, I just can't. And so it kind of falls by the wayside. And that's especially, I would imagine it's true of most instruments, but especially with guitar, this statistic is 80% of guitars that are sold aren't played after the first few months. And so they just kind of sit in rooms and attics and things like that. So my first bit of advice would just be keep playing. Even if it's not, even if you're not ready to improvise, just play whatever you can play, and then wade into it gradually. So obviously, a lot of the blocks with people in those cases are internal. It has to do with the musicality, and so start wading into these skills that are related to musicality. Find the ones that resonate with you the most. And I think you have a great list of them in the Musical You course materials. So you basically look at that list and say, okay, I'll start with this one, this one, this one. And just, start take baby steps, but do something to kind of get started in that direction.
Terrific. And if they're curious to try out Theta Music Trainer as part of that immersion into the world of ear training, what recommendations would you have for them?
Right. Again, it's a really hard thing with Theta Music Trainer because it so much depends on what it is in particular they're trying to develop, and we don't yet have that in place. But the ones the ones that I've found have most, I would say in general, have most applicability most of the time are the ones that relate to pitch. So if you go to Theta Music Trainer and go to the pitch category, that's usually a good starting place for a lot of people. And then if you find, okay, this is pretty easy, I've got this, then just move on to the next category in the list until you find something that matches whatever particular skill it is that you're trying to develop.
I think that's great advice, and I'm sure a lot of our audience will be headed over there now to give it a try. Thank you again so much, Steve, for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Christopher. It was a pleasure.
Want to know how musical you are and how to improve? Find out free at musicalitypodcast.com/checklist.
I love how humble and down-to-earth Steve is, even after creating such a groundbreaking and popular product. You can really see how this was a project born out of a passion for improving the status quo and helping musicians. Let's recap the major points we covered there. For Steve, it was ear training, and specifically relative pitch ear training, that made the difference in his musical life and let him finally do the things that he had thought required a gift or a talent. Even once he discovered that possibility, though, it took over a year of ear training and then further years of practice alone and practice performing before he felt fully free, showing that even though ear training is powerful, it's not a magic, quick-fix, overnight solution. Steve's experience of ear training as being slow and boring inspired him to find ways to make entertaining educational games and see if ear training could be fun and exciting instead. Despite appearances, Theta Music Trainer is not just a set of fun games. It is a serious tool suitable for adults and older learners to develop real skills. They found that users do need some guidance, though. Every musician is different, and so with 50 games available, each musician will need a different subset and a different sequence of those games to suit their musical life. Because of this, it's proven very popular in schools and with private teachers because the teachers can select the most suitable games for their students. In Japan, there's a better foundation of musicality in the traditional school system, and so there's actually less demand in schools, and it's more popular with individuals later in life. One reason for the games being designed for short, effective play sessions is that Steve noted the effectiveness of a little and often, rather than big long sessions and burnout for this kind of ear training. So where's the best place to start if you want to give it a try? Well, head on over to trainer.thetamusic.com. You'll find that link in the show notes. And Steve recommended beginning with the pitch games and then exploring from there to find the right selection of games for you. Making ear training fun and easy using technology was really the origin of Musicality, and Theta Music are pursuing that same important mission in a very different but equally effective way. That's why I'm always happy to recommend their games, and I love to see the ongoing developments they come up with. If you haven't tried it already, I definitely recommend giving Theta Music Trainer a try. Fun games, but serious skills. Or if you've tried it in the past and you want a fresh reboot for your ear training, why not go and check out their mobile apps or some of the more recently added games. Thanks for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we're going to pick up on that question we touched briefly on there of perfect pitch versus relative pitch.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's musicalitypodcast.com.
Hey there, Christopher again. Just a quick word before you take off. This podcast is brand new, and I have two things to ask you. Number one, if you're enjoying the show, please go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe to the show, and then rate and review it. This would mean a huge amount to me, and it really helps us get the show out there in front of more people, and that means helping more musicians just like you. The second thing is, I want your feedback. What do you think of the show? If there are things you love, hate, or would like to see us add, if there are guests you think we should interview, or if you have a burning question about musicality that you'd like us to answer on the show, please shoot me an email. It's hello@musicalitypodcast.com. Thanks so much for listening and for subscribing